The Messiah's coming soon. Yeshua warring with the Persians. When the missiles come on, everywhere I go. I see yeah, I see the yeah, I see yeah, cause we the Hebrews. Bahashem Yeshaya. Bahashem Yeshaya. Bahashem Yeshaya. Oh, praise to the Most High. Oh, praise to the Most High. I am that I am. The God that's with the Red Sea. Israel walked on dry land. Exodus 3:13. All the way to verse 15. The Most High's holy name. We shall not profane the Israelites for Hebrew. I am turned to a higher. There's no J's in Hebrew. It's not Jesus, it's Yeshaya. The Bible is a record that shows how we got to hate the rest of the minorities. We the same family. I'm a son of Levi and my Lord is from Judah. I was a young boy when I married a young queen in Judah. Deuteronomy 28, 68. Change shifts is how you change. Revelation 21 and the Revelation. I see Israel. I see Hebrew. Cause we the Hebrews. Yeah, I see Hebrew. I see Hebrew. Cause we the Hebrews. Bahashem Yeshaya. Bahashem Yeshaya. Bahashem Yeshaya.
Shalom, shalom, brothers and sisters. This is Brother Uriah from the Hebrew Israelite Home Bible Study Group here in Pensacola, Florida. Tonight we're going to be picking up on part 2 of the 613 Laws of Moses, specifically addressing the question, did the Messiah say to obey the Scribes and Pharisees? Did he indicate that we are no longer under the Mosaic laws? Well, in part 1, if you'll recall, the part 1 demonstrated that mankind had never been without the laws. When we go back to the time of Adam and Eve, or Kawa more correctly, we saw that they had the law, and that law was to leave that tree alone. Then we saw in part 1 that even during the time of Noah was instructed to gather a certain number of clean animals and a certain number of unclean animals. And we demonstrated there that Noah and no one else ever asked, well, what's an unclean animal? Indicating that they had at least part of the dietary law before the flood. And we all know that took place before Moses. So tonight we're going to get into this question about the seed of Moses, these scribes and these Pharisees. Okay, let's get started. Tonight's scripture is going to be taken from Matthew 23, verses 1 through 4. Then spoke Yahusha, aka Jesus, to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All, therefore, whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But do not ye after their works, for they say and do not. For they bind heavy burdens, and grievous to be borne, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. Let's take a close look at these verses again. So we have Yahusha speaking to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All, therefore, whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. Now ask yourself a question. Why would Messiah say such a thing? Why would he tell his followers to observe and do whatsoever the scribes and the Pharisees commanded them to do? Especially when you consider the following. Scriptures teaches us then that when we would establish a matter, we must establish that matter with two or more witnesses, never only one. So our witnesses to what we're presenting tonight is going to be taken from Matthew chapters 3, 5, and 9. Now I'm not going to read the entirety of these because you're perfectly capable of stopping the video and reading them yourselves. But I do want to highlight from these chapters. So from Matthew 3, 6 through 8, we see that the Pharisees and the Sadducees have come to where John is baptizing the people, and he refers to them as generation of vipers. In Matthew 5:20, and this one I'll read since it's so short. For I say to you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. Here he's clearly telling them, you scribes and you Pharisees, there's no way that you're going to enter into the kingdom of heaven. From Matthew 9 verses 10 through 12, we find that these same scribes and Pharisees are accusing the Messiah of sitting down and eating with publicans and sinners. When we turn to Mark as our second witness, we see in Mark chapter 2 verses 23 through 25 where these scribes and these Pharisees are confronting the Messiah and his disciples on the Sabbath because they dared to pluck off ears of corn. And they say, behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? When we go to Mark 3, verses 5 through 6, we see that, and this one I'm going to read. And when he had looked around, he, the Messiah, and when he had looked around about on them with anger, get that, with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he saith unto the man, stretch forth thine hand. And he stretched it forth, and his hand was restored whole as the other. And the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. These same Pharisees took counsel on how they should destroy the Messiah, because he healed a man's hand on the Sabbath. Turning to Mark 7, verses 1 through 3. Here we have the issue of washing hands again. These same scribes and Pharisees confronting the Messiah and his disciples, saying, with unwashed hands they found fault. For the Pharisees and all the Jews, except they wash their hands oft or often, eat not, holding the tradition of the elders. And that's exactly what this is, a tradition of elders. This was not the law. There is no law within the Mosaic law that you must often wash your hands before you eat. I mean, that's just a matter of common hygiene. When we turn to the book of Luke, chapter 5, verse 21 through 23, we find these same scribes and Pharisees. Let's pick it up at 21. He says, "And the scribes and the Pharisees began to reason, saying, Who is this which speaketh blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but Father Yah alone?" Here we have them accusing the Messiah of speaking blasphemies. Turning to Luke chapter 6, verse 6 through 7. It says, "Yet on another Sabbath, these same scribes and Pharisees are watching him to see if he's going to heal another man who has a withered hand." And let's pick up on Luke 7, verses 29 through 30. "And all the people that heard him and the publicans justified Elohim, being baptized with the baptism of John. But the Pharisees and lawyers rejected the counsel of Elohim against themselves, being not baptized of him." Lastly, let's turn to the book of John, chapter 3, verses 1 through 3 and 9 through 12. "There was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. The same came to Yahusha by night and said unto him, Rabbi, we know that thou art a teacher come from Elohim, for no man can do these miracles that thou doest, except Elohim be with him. Yahusha answered and said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of Elohim. Nicodemus answered and said unto him, How can these things be? Yahusha answered and said unto him, Art thou a master of Israel, and knowest not these things? Verily, verily, I say unto thee, we speak that we do know, and testify that we have seen, and ye receive not our witness. If I have told you earthly things, and you believe not, how shall you believe if I tell you of heavenly things? Now let's summarize what Scriptures has said about these scribes and Pharisees. Scriptures call these Pharisees vipers. Scripture says that these Pharisees will in no way enter the kingdom of Yahuwah. It says that the Pharisees accuse Yahusha of eating with sinners. These Pharisees accuse the Messiah of breaking the law by breaking off and eating corn, and for healing a man's hand on the Sabbath. These same Pharisees accused the Messiah and his disciples of not washing their hands before eating. And there is no law that says you must wash your hands. And believe me, this washing of the hands, it was very ritualistic. It's not just a matter to grab some soap and water and wash their hands. There was a very specific way they had to wash their hands. By their rabbinic law, just to take this little side, by their rabbinic law, they had to take a very special vessel. It had to be a special vessel made of a special material. It had to be cleaned a certain way, and they took the water into that vessel in their right hand, and then they would have to pour it over their left hand, and then they would take put the vessel into their left hand, and then pour it over their right hand, saying certain prayers as they did so. And they had to repeat that a second time, and in some cases even a third time. So this was not simply grabbing a bar of soap and washing your hands. These same Pharisees actually rejected the counsel of the Most High. They rejected the counsel, refusing to be baptized. So with this said, how could it be possible that the Messiah would then turn right around and say to us in Matthew 23, all, therefore, whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do? Now that raised a red flag in my mind, and as a consequence, I said, "No, something's not right here. Something's not right here." You know, we should know by now that there are some errors in these scriptures. Let me correct myself. There is no error in the true scriptures. It's when these heathen Gentiles are translating scriptures into their Gentile language is where we find the problem. And this is what I suspected was going on here. Why would the Messiah say such a thing? Because Messiah probably never said this ever. I think we're dealing with one of those problems of translation, which happens so often when these Gentiles corrupt the scriptures in their translation. Now, we've touched on this before in part 1, but for those who are just joining us, we'll go through it again. On the left-hand side, we have Matthew 23, as it appears in the KJV. We've read this a number of times, so we were not going to read it again. But on the right-hand side, we have what's called the Textus Receptus. Textus Receptus means the received text. It's written in the Gentile Greek language. Now, the last time we covered this, I didn't know how to pronounce certain words and phrases, such as the Scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All, therefore, whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. We just left it at being identifying the key word they. And let me say at this point that in part 1 there's an error there, where the arrow points to auton, I think that's how it's pronounced, but that's not the right word it should be pointing to. So I apologize for that error here. And I'm referring to what would appear in verse 3. Verse 3, that second line of verse 3, it would be the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th word. It looks like it's beginning with like the word auto, A-U-T-W-V. That's what it looks like. That's not how it's pronounced. And that's not the correct word. But we're going to correct that in this lesson. And again, forgive me for making that mistake. Okay, let's go forward. All right, let's see if we can line this up properly this time. On the left-hand side, we have Matthew 23, verses 1 through 3, as it appears in the KJV. On the right-hand side, we have the Greek Textus Receptus, written in the Gentile language of Greek. Okay, now, the arrows are pointing to from the English to the Greek. In the case of, let's say, Jesus. Jesus is pointing to the Greek word Iesus in verse 1. When we drop down to verse 2 and pick up the word scribe, it points over to the Greek word grammatus. The word and points over to the Greek word kai. And Pharisees points to the word Pharisaios. Now, it's in verse 3 that I made the mistake last time. I had the arrow pointing to the wrong word. Now, where it says they point over to the Greek word ipa. And that's where we need to pick up, because something is wrong here. In my spiritual sense, it says something's not right here. Because, again, why would the Messiah tell us to obey? Read what it says again in verse 3. All, therefore, whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But do not ye after their works, for they say and do not. Now, given what we've already covered about all the animosity, that existed, why would the Messiah tell his followers to do whatever these people said do? These Pharisees. And when you take into account the condition of Israel, particularly Jerusalem at that time, being overrun by these Greco-Romans, you have to see that something's amiss here. Something's not quite right. So it's based upon this concern that I said, I need to dig a lot further. Something's not right here. And this is what took me to what became, or the source of what I found to be what's called the Shem Tov, which is what we'll deal with next. Shem Tov. I have always been suspicious about the claim that the Gospels were written in Greek. It just didn't make any sense to me, to see why Hebrew Israelites would write the Gospels in a foreign language, in a pagan language. And yes, it is a pagan language because it's based upon the pagan Hamitic Phoenician language and lettering. So it just didn't make sense for these Hebrew Israelites to write the gospel in Greek, as the so-called experts and scholars always claim. And then, and because of that suspicion, I searched for a Hebrew source for the Gospel of Matthew. And lo and behold, it turns out that there is a Hebrew source for the Gospel of Matthew. It's in a work called Shem Tov. There was a work called Shem Tov written by a man named Shem Tov ben Shaprut. He was a 14th century Jewish, note that, author of Ibn Bohan, which means the touchstone. Now, included in his work was a copy of a centuries earlier copy of the Gospel of Matthew written in Hebrew, dating back before Erasmus's, if I said that correctly, Erasmus's Greek New Testament, published in 1516. Now, recall that this Ibn Bohan work was done in 1385, and within that work was that copy of the Gospel of Matthew written in Hebrew. And this Gospel of Matthew written in Hebrew, known as Shem Tov's Gospel of Matthew, is the oldest existing, and I'm going to say / revealed copy of the Gospel of Matthew. Why do I say revealed? Because I am very suspicious, and not only suspicious, I know that in places like the Vatican Library houses artifacts that these folks have stolen from around the world, and they've been doing it for centuries. This is how they claim the identities of others, and they claim the cultures of others. So in this book, Shem Tov, in this work Shem Tov, we find this Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. So let us look a lot deeper into this Gospel of Matthew written in Hebrew. Okay, now when we take a look at this first page of Shem Tov, we see the Hebrew writings, the Hebrew letters. And notice that they do not have those Nakud marks. They don't have this Nakud mark, indicating that this probably coming from a non-Masoretic text, a non-Masoretic source. Because it was those Masoretes who put those Nakud marks, those vowel markings in the Hebrew lettering. So this certainly suggests prior to that time period that this Hebrew Gospel of Matthew comes from. Okay, looking into the decorative rectangle at the top, it says Perek Rishon. Perek Rishon. Perek means a wall or a boundary, what we would call a chapter. And to the left of that is the word Rishon, which means one. So we'd have what would be chapter 1 or boundary 1. It would have that equivalence. Okay, below that it says Leha Teldet Yeshu bin David bin Avraham, which translates these are the generations of Yeshu or Yeshua bin, the son of David bin Abraham, the son of Abraham. Now, as you can see, the lettering is very, very, very small, and there's absolutely no way that I'm going to be able to read that. Plus, my Hebrew is not that good to be translating this document. So I know that I need to go to another source. If this is in existence, someone has known it before I did and have translated this. Okay, so we need to go into find a source where this Hebrew Gospel of Matthew has been translated. And lo and behold, it proves fruitful to do your research. As Father Yah tells us, he will reward those who diligently search for him. So, and I found what turned out to be this book called the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. Here you're looking at the front cover of the book Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, translated by George Howard, Professor George Howard, who is a professor at the University of Georgia, as I recall. So let's go inside and see what we can find. Now remember, we're looking for Matthew 23. Now when we go inside Professor George Howard's work called the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, we find the works of Shem Tov written in Hebrew. So what you're looking at is at the top, we have that would be the 22nd chapter, or chapter 22, found on page 112 of this work, and down towards the bottom where I have this word highlighted, which we'll get back to in a minute, we find chapter 23. Okay, so we're focusing in on the portion of Matthew that we are concerned with, which is Matthew 23. Okay, let's take a closer look at that area of Shem Tov. What you're looking at now is a close-up of that area of Shem Tov that is chapter 23. Alright, so, and to the right we see the verse numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And highlighted is the word Yomar. Yomar. And I'm going to reveal that. I'm going to tell you what that means a little bit later. But it's very, very, very significant. And this word Yomar, from right to left, spelled Yod, Aleph, Mem, Resh. Yod, Aleph, Mem, Resh. Now recall that earlier I said that Scripture said that if we establish something, we need to have 2 or 3 witnesses. Well, Shem Tov is our first witness. And we're going to let Professor George Howard be our second witness, providing the legible copy of this 14th century Hebrew Matthew 23. So Professor George Howard will serve that purpose as the second witness, providing the legible wording of Shem Tov chapter 23. And for our third witness, we're going to use the works by Professor Nehemiah Gordon entitled The Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus. Interesting title. There is a difference. So Professor Gordon is going to serve as our third witness in this endeavor to uncover what is actually being said in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 23, verses 1, 2, 3, and 4. He will provide the translation. Okay. So picking up at verse 2, we have the following translation. The Pharisees and sages sit upon the seat of Moses. Verse 3. Therefore, all that he says to you, diligently do, but according to their reforms and their precedents, do not do, because they talk, but they do not do. Let's go through that again. You need to take a close look at this. The Pharisees and the sages sit upon the seat of Moses. Therefore, all that he says to you, diligently do, but according to their reforms, known as takanot, from right to left, tav, kof, nun, ba, tav, takanot, and their precedents were known as ma'asim, do not do, because they talk but they do not do. Now below that we have the entry says, in the Hebrew Matthew, Yeshua is telling his disciples not to obey the Pharisees, not to obey them. He's saying not to obey them. If their claim to authority is that they sit in Moses' seat, then diligently do as Moses says. Diligently do as Moses says. How do we get that? Go back to that word toward the top on verse 3 that's highlighted. Yod, Aleph, Mem, Resh. That's the word Yomar. And Yomar means he. He. He who? Who is the Yeshua? Who is Messiah telling us to obey and to follow and do? Whose work is he telling us to do? He refers to it as he. Now when we compare this with the Greek Textus Receptus and its translation in the King James Version, it tells us that this word ipa, it uses this word ipa, which translates into the word they. They, on verse 3. They who? They, the scribes and the Pharisees. But this is not what the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew says at all, is it? It doesn't use the word they. It uses the word yomar. And the word yomar means he. So that in the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, verse 3, it would translate all, therefore, whatsoever he bid you observe. So let's go on to the rest of this Hebrew translation and see what other differences there are. So when we read this in the Hebrew and it's translated from Hebrew to English rather than from Greek to English, it says in Matthew 23 is saying, then Yeshua spoke to the people and to his disciples. And the Pharisees and sages sit upon the seat of Moses. Therefore, all that he, Moses, says to you, diligently do, but according to their reforms and their precedents, do not do, because they talk, but they do not. Clearly, the he is referring to Moses. He, He, he in the Hebrew, Yod Aleph Mem Resh, he who, Moses. So the scripture here is not telling you to be obedient to the scribes and the Pharisees, and whatsoever they tell you to do, you do that. He's telling you to obey Moses. And what did Moses say? Moses gave us the law. So Matthew 23 is telling you to obey the laws of Moses. You obey the applicable laws of Moses. This is crystal clear here. And what he's telling you not to do is do not obey these Pharisees and these scribes with what is translated as reforms and their precedents. And we're going to go into this a little further next. So picking up at verse 3, we have, all therefore whatsoever he bid you observe, that observe and do, but according to their reforms and their precedents, do not do, because they talk, but they do not do. That arrow that pointing from the word reforms over into the Hebrew is pointing to this word called takanot. Their reforms. They reform, they change, they modify, they added to the laws of Moses. So the scriptures are telling you not to obey them. Do not obey these reforms. And where it says, and their precedents, you follow that up, and this is followed to where it says, their ma'asim. Ma'asim, which is they translated precedents, those are acts that the rabbis might do, which they then say are now the laws. If they, and I'm just making this up as an example, but if a rabbi decides this is a good idea to eat a green apple every Friday, every fifth day, they're not going to use that pagan names for the day. If he said to eat a green apple on every fifth day of the week, then he can say, well, because I did it and I think it's a good idea, then everybody should do it. That is setting a precedent. And then they would use that precedent and call that the law and hold people responsible for obeying those precedents. So not only the takanot, the reforms, the changes of the law, but also these precedents, these ma'asim. And down in verse 4, now just drop down into verse 4 and then read that. For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. Now let's take a look at that. So when verse 4 is referring to, well, let's read it. For they, now we know when it says they, now they're talking about the scribes and the Pharisees. For they, the scribes and the Pharisees, bind heavy burdens. What were the heavy burdens that they were referring to? That's referring to these reforms, these takanot, that he's telling you not to obey. For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne. What is grievous to be borne? These takanot and these ma'asim, the reforms and these precedents. For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. Now this makes absolute sense. Remember all of those negative acts that we went through earlier of these scribes and Pharisees. And we ask the question, why would the Messiah tell you to obey these people while he's condemning them at the same time? Why would he tell us to obey the ones that he is condemning? Because he didn't. He's not telling us to obey the scribes and the Pharisees. He's telling us to obey Moses. Moses. And verse 4 refers to the heavy burdens that are grievous. What is he referring to? The reforms, these made up laws, these laws that are not the laws of Moses, these precedents that they just decide to add to the law. That's what's heavy. That's what's grievous to the people. Not the law of Moses. So clearly you can see when we go to the Matthew gospel, we get an entirely different result, don't we? When we use these Gentiles translation, we get corruption. Something's not right. Now someone might say, well, the Matthew gospel is corrupt. Well, but which one makes sense? Why would he tell us to obey those who he condemns? Why would he give you the law and then tell you, well, I come with some new law, a new set of laws? We don't go by the laws of Moses anymore. But yet the scripture tells us that the Father and the Son are one, doesn't it? He says if you've known the one, you've known the other. Again, that doesn't make any sense. The corruption by these Gentiles. And now, side by side, we have the Shem Tov, the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, versus the Greek Textus Receptus. Let's take a look at verse 4. The Greek Textus Receptus says, "For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne." But it doesn't say what the grievances were. It says their works. Do not after their works. Now, compare that with the Shem Tov, chapter 23, verse 3. It says explicitly, to their ordinances, their takana, and their ma'asim. The things that they're doing is their ma'asim, their precedents. You see, because they're hiding what was really intended by this word works. You know, what was heavy burden? It's the ordinances, the deeds, the man-made laws, these precedents. That's what was heavy burden and grievous to the people, because they forced the people to abide by them and would punish them if they did not do them, haul them into court. But they themselves didn't do them. They didn't abide by what they said was the law for the common man and woman. We have that going on today, don't we? Ain't nothing new. What was that in Ecclesiastes? There's nothing new under the sun. Indeed, it's not. This stuff has been going on and still goes on to this day. You shouldn't expect anything different until the Messiah comes and straightens it all out. All right, let's find a witness from Scripture that verifies what we're saying. If we go to 1 John 5:2-4, we read the following. By this we know we love the children of Yahuwah, when we love Yahuwah and keep his commandments. His commandments. For this is the love of Yahuwah, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous. So if the laws, statutes, and commandments are not grievous, then the laws which are grievous couldn't possibly be talking about the Mosaic laws of Torah. Being grievous is referring to the man-made laws of the Scribes and Pharisees, this double standard that they set up for themselves while expecting the common man and woman to obey these man-made laws which is why the Messiah said at one time, said, you're so concerned about these small things, yet the weightier matters of the law you neglect. This is crystal clear. It is to me. I hope it is to you. Here is Romans 7:12 through 13. Wherefore the law is holy, and the commandment holy, and just, and good. Was then that which is good made death unto me? Yah forbid. But sin, that it might appear sin, working death in me by that which is good, that sin by the commandment might become exceedingly sinful. It's clear as a bell here, where it says that the law is holy. What law? The law that we call the Mosaic Law. But we've established that the Mosaic Law is coming from Father Yah. It's coming from the Most High. It says that the commandment holy, just, and good. How can the commandments be holy, just, and good, and then be grievous at the same time? You know, that's gross contradiction. Gross contradiction. Because that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about the laws of the scribes and the Pharisees as being grievous and burdensome. But the laws, the Mosaic laws, are holy, just, and good. And we should always treat them as holy, just, and good. I'm sorry, somebody texting me. We should treat them as holy, just, and good. And we better be very, very, very careful when we start saying things like the Mosaic laws are gone. We don't go by them anymore. Have they changed? Yes, they changed. The laws have always changed. Now, for those of you who are going to respond and say, well, but the scripture says that Father Yah doesn't change. Well, we didn't say that he changes. We're saying that his law changes. The law changes based upon the circumstances. The law that was present at the time of Abraham and Noah are not the same as the laws at the time of Moses. They weren't even the same at the time of Noah. Stop and think about it. Let it sink in a little bit. Do the laws change? Yes, they change. In fact, the scripture says that they change. Why? Because we didn't do what we were supposed to do. We broke the covenant. And therefore, since the covenant changed, the laws governing the covenant changed. Does that mean every single law is entirely different? No. No. So when the first covenant was broken and a second covenant was established after the shedding of the blood of the Messiah, fulfilling the Pashak, then those sacrificial, those blood sacrifices by the Levitic priesthood came to an end, because that prophecy was fulfilled. You don't keep practicing something that has been fulfilled. You might honor it by remembering it, but with the understanding that it has been fulfilled. Let's go to that scripture. Let's go to that scripture, what I'm talking about, so we can see it firsthand. All right, let's take a look at Hebrews chapter 7, verses 11 through 13. If therefore perfection were by the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need was there that another priest should rise after the order of Melchizedek, and not be called after the order of Aaron? For the priesthood being changed, there is made of necessity a change also of the law. For he of whom these things are spoken pertaineth to another tribe, of which no man gave attendance at the altar. All right, let's break this down. If therefore perfection were by the Levitical priesthood, was there perfection in the Levitical priesthood? all you have to do to answer that question is think of the golden calf that was set up at the foot of Mount Sinai. And then the fact that the high priest Aaron was stripped of his garments. Do you remember why he was stripped of his garments? That is not an indication of perfection at all. Going on. What further need was there that another priest should rise after the order of Melchizedek? Melchizedek was not of the tribe of Levi. He was of, what tribe would you call him of? I would say he wasn't of any of those tribes. And not be called after the order of Aaron. What order was Aaron from? What tribe was Aaron from? He was of the tribe of Levi, obviously. It says, for the priesthood being changed. It's right there in front of you. The priesthood being changed. No longer under the Levitical priesthood, but now under the priesthood of Melchizedek. Because the priesthood has changed, there is made of necessity a change also of the law. There it is right in front of you. A change also of the law. Not Father Yah changing, the law changing. Why is the law changing? Because the circumstances change. What circumstances changed? We broke the covenant. Our ancestors broke the covenant. And a new covenant had to be made. And there was the fulfillment of prophecy. What did the Messiah say in Matthew 5? He said, I have not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill. Well, do you keep doing the same things after something is fulfilled that you were doing before it was fulfilled? Verse 13, for he of whom these things are spoken pertaineth to another tribe. What tribe was the Messiah from? We all know it's from the tribe of Judah. But the priesthood was of the tribe of Levi. Another tribe. So when it says, of which no man gave attendance at the altar, that means that no one from the tribe of Judah attended to the altar. No one. That's what that's referring to. So have things changed? Yes. What has changed? The priesthood has changed. If the priesthood if the duties of the Levitic priesthood are no longer because the Messiah has taken control of the high priest positionship under the order of Melchizedek, then all of those duties that the priests would perform under the Levitical priesthood couldn't possibly stay in place. It had to go also. Thus, the blood sacrifices. Why would the blood sacrifices go? Why? Because Melchizedek, the Yahushua HaMashiach fulfilled that prophecy. It's been fulfilled. Verse 13, for he of whom these things are spoken pertain to another tribe, of which no man gave attendance at the altar. Yahushua HaMashiach was of the tribe of Judah. And under the Levitical priesthood, no one from the tribe of Judah attended the altar. That's what that's saying. Okay, let's get ready to wrap this up. So, in conclusion, did Yahushua HaMashiach, aka Jesus, say that the scribes and Pharisees had the authority of Moses and we were to obey them? We have seen very plainly that the answer is no. He said not to obey the man-made laws of the scribes and Pharisees, called takanot, reforms, and their precedents, which were things that the rabbis did or experienced that were made to be law. This was called the ma'asim. So we are to what? Obey the Mosaic laws that are applicable today. The laws have changed. It is our responsibility to find out what laws have changed. We've already talked about one huge section of laws that changed, those pertaining to the Levitical priesthood. So my advice to you, brothers and sisters, is to obey the applicable laws of Moses as given by the Most High to his servant Moses. Your soul depends upon it. Shalom, brothers and sisters. Have a wonderful day.